your ability to focus, and in fact, your ability of neurons to encode specific information in your environment, that is, to represent what's out there in the world, is actually related to your blood glucose level. Now, here I'm setting aside the discussion of ketosis and ketogenic diets for the moment. But there's a beautiful study that was published in Neuron not long ago that showed that the tuning, that is the precision with which neurons in the brain represent things in our environment, is actually much greater when there is sufficient glucose in the brain. Translated into English, this means that when we are fasted or when our blood glucose is very low, we aren't able to perceive and think about things as clearly.
You have the insulin system managing glucose, and you've got the glucagon system pulling energy out of your liver and muscles for immediate fuel. And eventually you'll pull fuel out of body fat. If you've been active for a very long time and all your glycogen stores are depleted or close to depleted.
The nocturnal phase of the 24-hour cycle is very detrimental to one's health. In fact, when we eat can either enhance our health or can diminish our health. When we see light, can enhance our feelings of well-being or can diminish our feelings of well-being. When you view light is as important as the light that you view, and when you eat is as important as what you eat. Now, there's a twist to this, however. Many people who practice intermittent fasting, and I should say I practice a sort of pseudo-intermittent fasting. I generally eat my meals between the hours of 11 a.m. and 8 p.m., although sometimes there's some wiggle around that. Occasionally I have an early breakfast. I'm not super rigid about it. But I know there are a number of people who are doing longer fasts, or they're eating in a 6-hour window. Intermittent fasting has a lot of different potential benefits. For some people, it's a convenient way to restrict their calories. For other people, it's a convenient way to avoid eating. That is, it's easier to not eat than to eat a small portion, so they opt for intermittent fasting, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that you hear very often is that some people like being fasted because they like the clarity of mind that it provides. Here's the situation. Neurons, unless you're in a ketogenic diet, really thrive on glucose. They love glucose. And as I mentioned before, your ability to think and perceive things is actually enhanced by having sufficient glucose in your bloodstream. So why would it be that some people experience a heightened state of mental clarity when they are fasted? I've certainly experienced that before. Well, I should say that provided you're well hydrated enough and you have enough electrolytes in your system, what tends to happen is that when you ingest food, there's a shift in your nervous system towards so-called parasympathetic mode. That is, the more relaxed, you probably heard it as rest and digest, although it does other things, a more relaxed mode that can indeed make us very sleepy. If we have too many carbohydrates, it actually can make us quite sleepy. However, if we have any food, if we have enough of it, that is, if our gut is full, it diverts blood to our gut and we become sleepy and we can't focus as well. So a lot of people really like fasting in the state of being fasted for focus and concentration because they don't have as much of that parasympathetic activation. They're just not as sleepy. And in fact, under those conditions, half as much caffeine will give you just as much lift as twice as much caffeine will give you on a full belly of pasta. And that's just the way that caffeine interacts with blood glucose. Not only did restricting food to a particular phase of the 24-hour cycle benefit things like lean body mass and fat loss and a number of health parameters, but it also anchored all the gene systems of the body and provided a more regular, stable, so-called circadian rhythm or 24-hour rhythm.
There's an area of your cortex, so that's a little bit further up in your brain, called the insular cortex. And it processes a lot of different kinds of information. Mostly information about what's going on inside you, so-called the interoception. The insular cortex has neurons that get input from your mouth, from the touch receptors in your mouth. And insular cortex has powerful control over whether or not you're enjoying what you're eating, whether or not you want to avoid what you're eating, whether or not you had enough, or whether or not you want to continue eating more. And that has to do, believe it or not, with the touch or sensation of eating.
Fasting does good things for the brain. One thing that happens when you fast that does not happen when you eat 3 meals a day is that your energy metabolism shifts so that you start burning fats. And you produce what are called ketone bodies. Fasting is a challenge to your brain. And your brain responds to that challenge of not having food by activating adaptive stress response pathways that help your brain cope with stress and resist disease. Exercise and intermittent fasting both increase the production of proteins in the brain that are called neurotrophic factors. These neurotrophic factors, such as FGF and one called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, promote the growth of neurons, promote the connection of neurons and strengthening of synapses. Recently, we discovered that fasting, by increasing BDNF levels in the brain, this neurotrophic factor, can increase the number of mitochondria in your nerve cells. I mentioned ketones, which come from burning fat, and that happens during fasting.
Your body, when you're fed, relaxes. And so if you're just doing that all day long, and I know for a fact that when I am not fed and I go and do things, whether it's perform, I don't eat before shows. Like I take many hours before a comedy show. And I used to just like eat whenever. I just eat, and then I would do shows and I would have a meal like an hour before the show, and I'm really trying to wake up. I'm really trying to come on. But I've now recognized
digestive process just takes a lot of energy. And that digestive process, after you have a meal, can take up to 8 to even 12 hours to be completed. It's not only after you eat food, but you'll be using a lot of energy to process that and deliver the nutrients from that meal up to 12 hours later. And so once you cross that 12 hours mark, then you have more energy. That was before that, digesting food. Now you have this available for your cognitive abilities. Now you have better brain function. Is that if you fast for a little longer, maybe if you go for 16 hours of fasting, then you start to increase the amount of fat that you use to transform into energy. And when you transform fat into energy, this provides more energy to your brain than when you are burning carbohydrates. The results that your cognitive abilities go up.
If someone is eating 3 meals a day, plus snacks, and they're not exercising, then every time they eat, they're running on those calories and not burning their fat stores. Intermittent fasting works by prolonging the period when your body has burned through the calories consumed during your last meal and begins burning fat.
That we need to eat all day long. It's wrong. Eating all day long overtaxes our pancreas and our digestive system. It overtaxes it so much that it cannot work properly. And if it cannot work properly, we cannot absorb our food or the nutrients in that food. Another really important distinction when it comes to meal frequency or how frequently we're eating is the debate over sugar burners versus fat burners. And when we're talking about that, a sugar burner is someone that consumes lots of carbohydrates and taps into glucose as their primary fuel source, which is incredibly inefficient. If you recognize these individuals, they are frequently hungry, they often get hangry, they have significant dips in their energy level, they struggle more with fat loss and they struggle more with their weight because insulin levels are high. Insulin is that fat storing hormone. So if levels remain high, we have more oxidative stress.